Premier Smith, it's a pleasure to see you. As always, thank you so much for making the time.
Hi, Bashi.
I was listening to your press conference very closely just a few moments ago, and my impression was you were speaking as though it's kind of a done deal with this pipeline. And I just wanted to be clear for our viewers. If there is no private proponent, this pipeline doesn't get built, correct? Still?
That's what it says in the MOU. We're looking to have a private proponent build it. And that's, I think, the whole purpose of this exercise with the Major Projects Office, is that we want to ensure that we've got a regulatory process that is not only predictable, but will also result in a positive outcome. And once we get to that point, I have no doubt that a private proponent, either a single one or a consortium, will step forward to build. And that's what we're working towards.
There is also language in the MOU, though, around a backstop, about the potential backstop, I should say, at both the federal and the provincial level when it comes to Indigenous co-ownership. What does that mean? Is that in the form of loans? Or, to be clear, again, for Albertans and Canadians watching, like, is there any taxpayer money going into this thing?
Well, I can tell you the approach that we've taken, which I'm pleased to see that other provinces and the federal government have replicated, is offering loan guarantees. One of the insights that my predecessor, Jason Kenney, had was that one of the reasons why bands are not able to take on ownership stakes is because they need a bank to ensure that they will underwrite the loan. And that's what we step in with. We do it through our Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. We have the ability to underwrite up to $3 billion in loan guarantees. We're about $750 million right now on a variety of projects, and that's what we would put towards this, is the offer of a loan guarantee. I think the British Columbia government has something similar. The federal government does as well, but that has proven successful, especially on these kinds of projects that have a long-term revenue stream associated with tolling once they're up and running.
But that's the limit to the backstop that you would provide with taxpayer dollars, correct? Like, it would come in that form. It would not be through any other means to fund the construction of a pipeline.
That would be the intention, definitely.
The intention, or what will actually happen?
Well, look, Coastal GasLink is partially owned by AIMCO. The Caisse de dépôt et placement owns a portion of the DP World ports. So there have been instances in the past where various pension funds have come in and also had a portion of various pipeline infrastructure and other projects, as long as they're profitable and have a revenue stream. But those decisions aren't made by me. They're made by the various pension fund managers that we have.
You referenced a conversation with Premier Eby last night, as well as Premier trilateral talks. The MOU talks about engagement with coastal First Nations, as well as, or First Nations more largely, as well as the province of British Columbia. I have to ask, look, I've conducted a number of interviews with the Premier of British Columbia on this subject. The one thing that confounds me is why he wasn't brought into the discussions earlier. Did you and the Prime Minister put the prospect of this project at risk by not bringing him and coastal First Nations into the fold earlier? And if so, why?
Well, I know I've done many, many conversations with you where I think every press conference, every time I was asked about this, I said that we were in conversations with the federal government over this, that we were going back and forth, that we had multiple different drafts, that we had a negotiating team. I've been talking about that for months. So the reason why we had to is most of the elements of this deal are related to Alberta. Removing the emissions cap was vitally important for us to get all projects going ahead. Getting the carve out on the clean electricity regs, that applies to Alberta because 90% of our power grid is natural gas, and various other elements. The greenwashing bill to be able to get that also repealed. So there were a number of things that we had to do here to restore confidence in developing the production side of the business, but also restore confidence in being able to deploy new electricity infrastructure as well. So most of the MOU deals with creating an investment climate for Alberta. And then the federal government, as you know, is solely responsible for cross-border infrastructure, including pipelines. That's been litigated before. And I'm glad to see that the Prime Minister has an intention to work with us on that.
And I take your point about a large part of this applying to your province, but there's another big part, if this pipeline does go ahead, that clearly applies to British Columbia, including the potential removal or exemption. I know the language is very specific in the document around the tanker ban. The point that Premier Eby has made is that even speculation around that has put very real, as he characterizes it, projects around LNG at risk, because coastal First Nations have supported those projects because there is a tanker ban. I have heard you on multiple occasions talk about the imposition of laws that you consider bad and put investments in your province at risk. Why would you participate in a process that does the same for another premier? Can you understand how he feels?
Well, I believe in the Constitution, and so I know things that are intra-provincial projects are the responsibility of the province, but ports are federal jurisdiction, cross-border pipelines and transmission lines are federal jurisdiction, and trade and commerce is federal jurisdiction. You cannot have a province blocking access of another landlocked province to get their products to market. That's been determined by the courts. And so we're very pleased to already start the consultation and with the nations, including coastal First Nations. I had a very pleasant conversation with the Haisla chief yesterday, and they made it very clear that they're open to all kinds of work with Alberta on all kinds of products, maybe not as enthusiastic about bitumen, but they're also excited about expanding LNG and also expanding additional export opportunities. So I would say I have not experienced what Premier Eby has described. I haven't heard a single nation that we've engaged with in British Columbia say that they're going to trade off one against the other. They're letting us know what their perspectives are. We're pleased for that. And we're going to keep on working with them to see if we can put together a consortium that will also be able to own a portion of this new line.
I have seen, some of those First Nations put out specific statements, but with respect to what you said about the federal jurisdiction here, I do take your point on their constitutional ability with interprovincial projects, but I also remember many times when you have not believed in the Constitution as it applies that way, when you have fought against, for example, decisions to impose carbon pricing, even though the Supreme Court dictated that that was in federal jurisdiction. Again, I'll put to you, is the project not more at risk because BC and those coastal First Nations were not brought into the fold earlier?
I don't think so. I mean, I've not heard any nation say they're going to cancel their support for LNG Canada 2.0 because of any conversations Alberta's having. I just don't think that's true. But what I will say is that we respect the Constitution and also the Supreme Court. They did make a decision that the federal government does have the right to set floor prices on CO2, which is why that forms a basis for our agreement. We have a tier agreement. It's our approach to how we do carbon pricing, which we've been doing, incidentally, since 2007. So other jurisdictions have followed us, sometimes by decades, and we have to work collaboratively with the federal government. That's why that is part and parcel in the agreement, that we'll come to a stringency agreement and figure out what the top rate would be. We want to have a balance of making sure that it's going to support the investment in carbon capture technology, but also not be punitive to our industry, so that we have the ability to invest in those things. So I think that's what it's about when you have an agreement. There are certain commitments and undertakings we have to do, and there's certain commitments and undertakings that the federal government has to do. But I was very pleased to see that they've made great movement on the lion's share of the 9 bad laws that we put on the table.
I will say, like, you're saying carbon price floor is okay from the federal government. You weren't saying that for a lot of years. That is a very different position that you're taking now, because it appears to benefit other projects. Will you keep the increase, the 6-fold increase the Prime Minister just described when it comes to the industrial carbon price, even if another bitumen pipeline doesn't go ahead?
Well, I think, again, that's not true, Vashi. We had a tier agreement before I came in that agreed that we would increase the price on CO2 for industrial emitters up to $170 per ton by 2030. We paused it this year because with the changes that we've seen in the world, the disruption in energy markets, we knew that price going that high that quickly was going to be harmful to our industry. And now we're in a negotiation with the Prime Minister about what that is going to look like. So I hope we can come to an agreement where we've identified April 1st as a time for when we're going to announce what that agreement would look like. There's going to be some more negotiations that have to take place, but that's part of what happens when Canada and Alberta work together. I think we both benefit. Not everybody gets 100% of what they want, but I can tell you that we certainly moved the dial on many of the things that we did want to start getting investment from the private sector back into our province again.
The Prime Minister just said that the industrial carbon price would increase the effective, I think he said, rate of it by 6-fold. I just want to be clear. Well, I'll ask the question again, Premier. If, in fact, a bitumen pipeline does not go ahead to the West Coast, will you still agree to increase the industrial price on carbon as it applies to your province?
Well, as I said, it's a negotiation. I don't think if you look at the agreement, it doesn't talk about $1,000 carbon price in the agreement. It talks about $130 carbon price, and that's what we're looking at. So I would say that we have an agreement in place. We've got some parameters that we've put in there. There is no veto for any province. There is some acknowledgement that the price has to go up, but there's also an acknowledgement that that's going to be a negotiation. I'm looking forward to that.
Is it contingent on a pipeline going ahead in your view?
Well, I think what you've seen in the agreement is that the Pathways project going ahead is contingent on a pipeline to the Asian markets going ahead, and vice versa. The pipeline has to go ahead for Pathways to go ahead as well, and we're going to work on stage gating both of those things so they happen at the same time.
I didn't mean the Pathways, my apologies. I mean the industrial price on carbon.
We've always had an industrial price on carbon since 2007.
The increase, apologies, the increase, Premier.
Well, as I said, we're going to be negotiating that on April the 1st. We have to make sure it's at a level that is going to continue to keep our projects and our market competitive. You have to remember that in the rest of the world, most of the countries have a target of 2050. So I was pleased to see that we've moved to that same target of 2050 without having any interim targets. China, I believe, has a 2060 target. India has a 2070 target. And that, I think, is more in keeping with the idea that we have to give industry enough time to be able to invest and develop the technologies in order to make that achievable. But yes, there's an acceptance that we know $95 is not where it's going to stay, and that it is going to rise. But the level that it's going to rise, how quickly and to what level, that remains a subject of negotiation that we'll have with Canada in due course, and hopefully have an announcement on April the 1st.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. A pleasure as always, Premier. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Vashi.